Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pod Maverick. This is Kirk Henderson. I am re-airing a special show that I recorded the day of Dirk's retirement of his jersey. This was back in early January of 2022. It was sort of a day where I didn't have much going on in my real job, so I contacted as many Mavs media and then media people at large that I could think of and recorded a number of short 7 to 15 minute interviews, spliced them all together, and ran them on the show. It ended up being 8 different folks: Jason Gallagher, then Matt Moore, Rob Mahoney of The Ringer, Bobby Karalla. Then there's going to be a short break for ads, and then I decided to go ahead and include the short interview I did of Jonathan Tjarks about Dirk. With his passing now, it felt a little odd to share it, but I decided I wanted to anyways, just because he cared a lot about Dirk, and I don't think he'd mind. And plus, it's just kind of nice to hear my old friend's voice. Then we did Dalton Trigg, Tim Cato, and then lastly Ben Collins of NBC News. This was a special show for me. I had fun doing it, and I really wanted to re-air it again. I don't often think that some of the work we do is outstanding. It's a grind posting things, so sometimes things just get lost in the shuffle. But this felt like a really special show, and I wanted to share it with you again. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you guys enjoy Dirk's Hall of Fame weekend, because it's something I think we've all earned, and you should take joy in basketball stuff. All right, guys, we'll be back next week with more shows talking about the retirement ceremony itself. Thanks so much for listening. Everyone have a great weekend. I'm joined by my friend Jason Gallagher of all sorts of places. You've known him from his current work at Old Man and the Three and a number of other podcasts. What's the name of your network, Jason? I probably should have asked you that before the show.
It's called the 342 Productions. It's a production company. I don't know if I'd call it a network. It's a network.
It's it has potential.
Yeah.
You're doing a ton of work.
Yeah. But it's 342 Productions. Do that with JJ Redick and Tommy Alter, Kylie Kilgore. It's fun.
Well, and anyone, Jason was a writer, co-writer of our Hallelujah, which my 5-year-old son doesn't understand that that's not the real version. Jason's just contributed so many things to our sports lives, and including a lot of Dirk content over the years, which is why we're talking today, because we're talking on January 4th, and tomorrow night Dirk's jersey is getting retired by the Mavericks after the game, which, let me tell you, that's a choice. But they couldn't do it before because of the way nobody in Dallas traffic would get there on time. They'd retire his jersey to 35 people. So I just wanted to bring you on here and pick your brain a few minutes and hear what are some of your favorite Dirk memories. What are the things you like talking about and sharing with people in relation both to your time as a fan and as your time doing, media work?
Sure. What's funny is Dirk is a huge reason why I got into this industry. And I came to this revelation when I was thinking about his career and everything like that. And he had the kind of career, he was the kind of player that you cheer for, that in the end, you sit back and you say, I don't know if I'm ever going to experience a sports thing like that ever again. And I would say, short of your team being like a dynasty, I'm not sure any sports fan could ever really have a sports moment like the way that he provided in 2011. And so that to me is what I remember about Dirk, is that he gave us, I honestly am I don't watch sports the same way, because the investment that went into Dirk and the trials and tribulations and everything like that, that to me is what really sticks out, is that in terms of sports movie moments, they're literally, his journey is a top 5 all time, in my opinion. And I consider myself very lucky to be cheering for him during that time. You couldn't have written it any better. You literally couldn't write that script any better. And again, that's why I got into this entire thing, because it was such a story. It was a movie, and I think that the best screenwriters in the world could not write that one.
It's funny for men of a certain age and women of a certain age. Like Dirk's not that much older than us, but he feels like he's just like omnipresent in my life, where I mark things that were happening to me based on what the Mavericks were doing for almost 20 years. And it's so odd to think about it like that. And I think what's been, what hopefully won't get lost is just how he's just such a normal dude. So many of the players today, I think they because of social media and all this stuff, they kind of have to be polished in a way that wouldn't, Dirk was not, he was just a dude. Like the photos I shared with someone yesterday, the photos of him in like 2003, him and Nash like trashed out about town. Like that doesn't happen anymore. Like it might, but everybody takes phones and cameras away. It doesn't. So it's just, I really, and his kind of impact on the community. I think that Luka kind of gets a bad rap in this because he's not going to be Dirk. And Dirk adopted Dallas as much as Dallas adopted Dirk. And that's probably one of the things that as we get further away from it will stand out more.
Yeah, totally. And it brings up the thing that I love about him is that it brings up a type of basketball dialogue. Like he represents a type of player. Like we have the debate all the time, KG or Dirk or, Tim Duncan or Dirk or whatever. And I happen to have this like incredibly hot take that he was a better NBA star than just about anybody during his time, mainly because of what you're talking about. Because one, he has this incredible story. Two, he's as personable about it as any NBA player. And then three, the way he changed the game. And so those for me are why I think he meant so much to the NBA. I'm not saying the others didn't. I mean, Tim Duncan's obviously a lot, you would say he had a better career, but I think as something that JJ Redick even says, the NBA is an entertainment industry, and that guy, Dirk Nowitzki, was as entertaining as hell. And for that, I think that he will be remembered as much as anybody, just simply because of how good of an NBA like star he was.
I really like that framing because him getting picked as one of the ambassadors for the NBA's all 75th team, I think really speaks to how much of a forward-facing and relatable guy he is. Because there was that video, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had lots of really awkwardly nasty things to say about Dirk. Like it kind of talked about him like a professor. Like he didn't mean to be shitty, but Kareem's just kind of shitty sometimes. And then like Dirk and he had like this video that they filmed together where they're like talking and getting along. And like Dirk just kind of has this effect on his peers where, it always made me sad that nobody really wanted to ever team up with Dirk. But as his peers of the time, and even like guys like Michael Jordan saying that Dirk could play in his era, as we get further away, I think a lot of us are going to have to kind of fight for Dirk's legacy because he was simply one of the toughest, most respected, and most liked guys in the league.
Yeah, I mean, fighting for his legacy is something that you and I do on a weekly. Because, what's funny about him is that, at the Ringer, I used to joke that we should do like this debate show, like tag team debate, where we have like four, because it was always split in the office, Dirk's place compared to his contemporaries. And I, he was such a, what am I trying to say here? Okay. So he basically, the value of what he did offensively sort of transcends a lot of like, I would say like typical basketball dialogue. And so when we're fighting out him on the streets, I'll say that like, I remember meeting with the GM during Dirk's quote unquote prime and him saying that you would take Dirk's offense over just about any other skill any other day because you can build around that. And it's actually harder to achieve, when you drop a half court play and everything breaks down, your like breakdown, like last minute option is to dump it to one of the best offensive players who can self-create a shot. You know what I mean? And that to me is like something that you can't. And yes, other players were better at defense, and yes, other players were this and that and the other. But I think that particular skill was, at least at the time, so desperately needed in the NBA. And he was one of a tiny handful of players that could actually do it. Another really funny thing is that, what is his prime? I mean, that's a funny question to me, because
his basketball reference page is a wall of numbers that, with the exception of like 2 outlier years, his first and his last year, look the same.
Yeah. And like, anytime you get into this argument with people, they go, well, 2011 was amazing. And it's like, you have no idea. You have no idea. 2011, in my mind, is not his peak. I mean, it's his peak in terms of just story and whatever, but he was unbelievable from like 04 to like 2009, like unbelievable. Like, and it's hard to talk with people about that, because he was also, you know, I would say half the people on NBA Twitter probably weren't watching basketball in 2004, which is another part of the argument, which is super funny. But that dude, the fact that 2011 is considered his peak is almost hilarious.
He was 32.
He was 32 years old, and he obviously adjusted his game in a way that was probably, you know, he was definitely at his mental peak. That's like, there's no denying that. But yeah, that's what's so funny to me about when you really talk about Dirk, is you can't really define what his peak is. And I think the peak of what he does best is a rare thing in the NBA, and it's really, really hard to find. And I think that's why that particular GM, which I will not name, said what he said. He was just like, our game plan defensively against him is just shut him down. Like, you have to shut him down. And there's only a handful of players that you can really do that with, I think.
Well, we're gonna do this again, because Dirk will go into the Hall of Fame relatively soon. But there's a tweet that happened back in July that said dudes can literally just sit around and name old sports players and just have the best time. That's what this is. We're just going to talk about Dirk, and I appreciate you giving me part of your Tuesday afternoon. And I'll have you on again shortly, because we need to talk Mavs in general. But for now, I appreciate you taking time out of your day.
I could do this all day. I'm just letting you know.
Thank you, Jason Gallagher. All right, we'll talk soon. Bye. Welcome, Matt Moore of the Action Network, joining us today. Matt, how are you?
Doing well, man. How are you?
I'm okay. I really, thinking about Dirk, because his retirement ceremony is tomorrow, and you and I didn't really become friends until after the 2011 championship, and I really wanted to get you on here because Dirk struck me as the kind of player that Matt Moore of the mid 2000s would have absolutely just loved watching and then argued for. So I wanted, was hoping to get kind of your thoughts on, Dirk as a player, impact. What are some of your favorite Dirk memories?
Yeah, the 2011 run is what made him, because of the title, and he was incredible. For me, he was a big reason why I started writing about the NBA, was that mid 2000s era with the Suns and the Mavericks and the Spurs gets lost to history. And those teams were great, and the games were competitive, and it was this new brand of it was actually great offense, which we suffered through a lot of years of really crappy offense. And so watching that Mavericks team with Josh Howard and Jet and Dirk was really phenomenal. And I remember I was working in a pizza parlor running a poker game one night when the Mavs and Suns had a late regular season battle that went to double or triple overtime. And it was just bonkers. The shot making was incredible. It was this gigantic matchup, and watching Dirk really break the mold in those mid 2000s years. He was not immediately, the rookie year was rough, but by 2004, it was oh, hey, Dirk's a problem. And then it kind of went from there. And he was good, but there were all these questions, and he was this player that's okay, is he too soft? Is he, why is, he can't play defense. He doesn't rebound enough, all these type of things. And just to see him have these massive scoring performances where he could absolutely just, and even the Spurs were so good and so great defensively. And you would just see that they're just like, there's nothing we can do with this guy. There's just nothing we can do with him. There were so many amazing games that he had night after night after night. And it wasn't just like it is now where it's like pick and roll, shoot a three. Like it was this combination of moves and footwork and finding spots in the defense. And you couldn't do anything with him because of his size. He was such a dominant player in a way that we weren't used to seeing domination without the kind of physicality that centers had brought. Like Jordan dominated, but it was a lot different. And Dirk dominated you just by like, there's nothing you can do against this guy. And for me, my top memory actually does come from the 2011 experience because I covered, that was the first finals I ever got to cover.
Oh, really? I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. The first finals I ever got to cover was the 2011 finals. I started with CBS in 2010, and the first one I ever covered was the 2011 finals. And it was an amazing experience, and I have a lot of stories from covering that one. But my favorite one is we're standing in line. There's this huge line of reporters outside the Mavericks locker room. This gigantic line outside the Mavericks locker room because everybody's waiting to get in. You got international media, all these people. And Dirk walks briskly by going to his interview and like his one-on-one ESPN interview and photo shoot with the finals MVP trophy. And he's holding it as he walks by. And I've said this, I still to this day, I have never seen an NBA player look so happy. Not LeBron after he won the first title, not Steph and the Warriors, nobody has ever, in my experience, looked as happy in an NBA setting as Dirk looked at that moment. He was you knew how much it meant to him. He wasn't building a brand. He wasn't cultivating a lifestyle brand. Like he was a player that had given so much to the game and come so close and been broken so many times. And to see him in that moment was really gratifying.
It's something with him because I just talked with Jason Gallagher a little bit ago, and we talked about how Dirk is a lot more respected by his peers than like the NBA fans of today would understand. You know, the basketball's changed a lot in the 10 years since the title with the way social media presents the game. And I don't think fans probably under the age of, 25 to 28 would really grasp how difficult Dirk's journey was. And it's something to watch. And I'm his peers seem to really, really like him, and him being selected to that, the ambassadors group of the all NBA all 75 team is really interesting. And it's just, I've been thinking about how his kind of legacy is going to age, and it's just going to be so different from so many of his contemporaries. Cause he just played such a different game. Like you mentioned.
You mentioned that the other players liked him. I think it's funny in that, LeBron has alluded to this without ever saying it. There's like a club, right, of the superstars and the guys that hang out with the other superstars. And Dirk obviously like hung out a lot. We have a lot of photos of his time with Nash as proof of that. But he was always a player that did seem a little bit on the outside because he wasn't a member of that superstar club. He didn't come up through AAU. He didn't come up through that whole system. And so he was appreciated. And I will say, like, his personality did shine through. Like, he seemed like a genuinely warm, good guy. What's funny is in that 2000s, that mid 2000s range, there were all these players. And it's funny seeing these same cycles repeat over and over again of guys who fans just genuinely hated and like just hated them because of their personas on the court and how good they were. And we've seen this over and over again with like Chris Paul and honestly like LeBron and Dwayne Wade. And we're seeing it with Russell Westbrook and Curry, I think to a lesser degree. He is pretty beloved. I think the people that hate him are very vocal, but in general, I think Steph has a high Q rating. But like Draymond, or
like kids love Steph Curry. Like that's yeah.
And we're seeing it like with like Trae Young now. Like there's just like all these people that fans come to really hate. And I think Luka will probably have his moment in that spot too, once he has a team that's good enough to beat somebody in the playoffs. And so you have to have that though. And that was the thing, is like, there were people that I remember being like, I fucking hate Dirk Nowitzki. I hate Dirk Nowitzki, just like, and you'd ask like, why? He's nice and he's had such a great game. And they would just be like, oh, just, he thinks he's so good. He's so pompous. And like anyone that has any sort of close attention to Dirk
was just like this humble dork who liked to play basketball.
Yeah. But like, that's the whole thing, is in your prime, you do have this different aura of villainous, invincibility.
Well, he was a killer. He was an like, there was a 2-year stretch that coincided with some of Kobe's really great years, where Dirk was absolutely murderous on the court. And I think a lot of people feel that 2006 MVP shouldn't have gone to Dirk. I understand why. Not really here to debate that. But that just some of that sort of comes with it, because his teams, when he was at probably his basketball peak, his teams failed. And then, he had that sort of sojourn into the wilderness from 2008 to 2010, where the Mavericks were really, really good, but it didn't matter. And by that, with the title run, that's why you talked about him being so happy really matters a lot, at least to me, because he had suffered a lot. He'd really taken kind of a basketball hero's journey to get where they got, and to see him finally win it was really impactful.
I have continuously caped for that 2007 MVP. I've been like, you got like, anyone that thinks that he was not the MVP that year is nuts. Like,
they went on a 52-4 stretch.
Yeah. And what's crazy, I think I think about that year a lot because of a number of things, including, like that broke Avery, and that was eventually the reason why he was let go. And a lot of, you don't come back from that kind of collapse. You lose in the finals, and then you lose in the first round the year after. But like, I remember paying attention to the league at that time as closely as I did, that you don't really understand how much of a perfect storm that Warriors series was.
Yep. It was tough.
It was an incredible moment, and everyone, I will say, like, everyone was outside of Dallas was kind of rooting for the Warriors, just because we hadn't seen an 8 upset of 1 in a long time. And so it was like this crazy thing. And the Mavs just did kind of seem and that team was so crazy. It was just batshit crazy with Steven Jackson and Barrett Davis and like all these guys, Biedrins and all the rest. And so it was this really chaotic energy. But I just keep going back, and every time I would think about it later, I'd be like, man, if they face anybody else, that Maverick team wins that title. Like, that's what's kind of interesting to think about. Is the 2011 was so cathartic. Beating Wade and LeBron, beating the Triad Heat, Dirk being sick, them making fun of him, all that, the whole story of the finals. It's a great story, but I do often think about, like, what does it look like if Dirk, if they don't get matched up with the Warriors? Because anybody else, I do believe this, anybody else, and they are winning the title. As much as you could say, like, well, that team was flawed. We say that when a team loses, and if they win, it's like, oh, nobody was beating them. And I'm always like, well, no, that team could have lost. And the teams that didn't win definitely could have won if they got in a different matchup. But yeah, that 2007 year, 25-9, 50, 42, 90, a 50, 40, 90 MVP season. He was absolutely ridiculous. And yeah, like after that, they were really lost in the wilderness until the big New Jersey trade. And that was kind of like when they flipped into a new era, and then they got it together in 2011. But I always think it's crazy that everyone's kind of like, well, 2011 was his best season. I'm always like, okay, so you just didn't watch him in the mid 2000s then. You just watched the finals.
Right.
Because Dirk was great in 2011 because that Mavericks team was great in 2011. And like, you look at the numbers, and like Dirk's still in 2011, 23 on 7 on 52, 39, 89. Still phenomenal numbers, real close to the MVP season. But like, I will say that he wasn't as dominant in 2011. The Mavericks were dominant because they hit you in so many different ways.
Yep.
And a lot of that is they were able to do that because of how Dirk played, and because Dirk never got in the way of his team winning.
Yep.
That's a big deal to me. Is that you never watched it and were like, Dirk was the reason that they didn't win. Like they were flawed because Dirk couldn't change or because of the X, Y, or Z. There's a lot of superstars, especially today, that I could tell you like, no, like when push came to shove, it was their weaknesses, whether on the defensive end or playmaking, that kept them from it. And even though Dirk wasn't this masterful, playmaker passer, he never held the Mavericks back. And that's something that I think gets lost at time, is how much all of their failures, you were never able, you could point to like, well, he had a bad quarter, he had a bad game or whatever. The team was never fundamentally vulnerable because of Dirk.
Yep. Well, Matt, this has been exactly what I had hoped for. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Talk soon. Now I'm joined by Rob Mahoney of The Ringer. Rob, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. With Dirk retiring tomorrow, I wanted to bring on some of my friends, or not retiring, it's Jersey getting retired, and talk a little bit about Dirk. And you are probably one of the people I associate the most with Dirk, just because I read the two-man game way back in the day. And I wanted to ask you, just, with now that we've had some time away from Dirk, what are your sort of like lasting memories of the enormous Dirk Nowitzki era?
Oh, that's a big question. I mean,
It is.
to your point about the two-man game, I mean, I've written about basketball for a long time. I would imagine I've written more about Dirk than any other player in NBA history that I've ever written about, just by virtue of writing about the Mavericks for so long, and the fact that those things were synonymous, right? The idea of writing about Dirk and writing about the Mavs were one and the same. And to me, that's the whole thing right there, is for a player who was totally revolutionary in the way he played the game, was almost unbelievably stable in terms of what he offered on the court and what he offered to an organization. You just don't see that. Like when guys come along and play a position a different way, there's usually a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of instability that comes with figuring out, like, what does it mean to build around a player who's doing something totally different than we've ever seen before. And Dirk had all of those growing pains, all of those bumps, all of those weird rosters around him. Do we play him with a center? Do we not? What kind of point guard works with him? What doesn't? Played with some just unbelievably ill-equipped rosters, in terms of what he was given relative to other stars. And yet, top 10 offense every year, often a top 5 offense for the majority of his prime, 50 wins every season. The expectation of being in the playoffs every season, that just does an unbelievable thing for a team as a franchise when you're able to do both of those things at once. And I don't know when the last time we saw that was, and when we'll ever see it again, in terms of someone being both so stable and so revolutionary at the same time.
I mean, the only real comparison that comes to mind for me is Steph Curry. There really might not be anyone else that's actually close because of stability to an organization, and then like just the sheer sense of how he played the game differently in a way that took fans and analysts a long time to come around on. And I just had our friend Matt Moore on a little while ago, and he talked about how those, the Suns, Mavs, and Spurs of kind of the early to mid 2000s were what he considers like some of his favorite time, like watching basketball as a fan, and then which resulted in him, dipping his toes into the writing. And it's just, it's one of these things where, the NBA era has changed and you don't really notice it until after it's gone. And as with Dirk's jersey retired, he's only been gone from the game for a while. I think there's just like a whole generation of fans who may not ever entirely understand why Dirk was so important, but also why Dirk was so good.
Yeah, it's one of those things where longevity, I feel like, is one of the hardest things to convey. Like, you can talk about someone's peak, you can show them clips, you can get a sample of how good someone was, but to understand that they were that good for more than a decade, for 15 years, for almost 20 years in the case of guys like Dirk and now LeBron, for example, it's just impossible to convey to somebody who wasn't there to absorb the volume of it. That's the kind of tricky thing. And I think part of the reason why those conversations get complicated and why players and stars especially sometimes get underappreciated is the idea that, like, if you're plugging away at it for so long and you don't get to a finals, or you don't get to a championship, or you don't win an MVP, or whatever kind of arbitrary metric you want to set, that there must be something wrong with them. But the reality of it, and I think history has kind of shown this with Dirk, especially as we look back, is that he was very rarely the problem.
Seriously.
It was very rarely the problem with anything. Oh, you're good. With anything that was going on in Dallas. And so the idea that you can have a player who is performing at that kind of level, at, if not an MVP level, then certainly an all-star, all-NBA type level for so long, something that's probably washed out a little bit by the fact that he played in an era with Duncan and Weber and Garnett, and those guys were just like fighting for accolades all the time. But when you look back at the larger body of work, and I think especially for the people who lived through it, it's almost easy to take for granted in some ways, but it's indelible in terms of the impact it can have on, as you're saying, not only the Mavericks and what they do and all the players and coaches and people who came through, but as a fan, and someone, an observer of the game, the way it informs the way you look at the whole sport and what you expect and what you think is reasonable. Like, winning 50 games every season for a decade plus is not a thing that teams do. And yet it's a thing that the Mavericks did with Dirk.
It's so funny you say that, because I was, it's not to pivot to this year's Mavericks, but this year, I think everyone that had watched the Mavs had higher expectations, just because that's the way sports expectations go. And then you have a superstar. And Dirk really he raised the floor of the Mavericks so regularly, regardless of who was on the team. I mean, it's really funny going through some of the basketball reference pages at certain points where, and it's not so much the 2000s, it's the post-championship years are really kind of lost gems with Dirk, because he just drug teams to the playoffs.
Oh yeah.
the series the one game they won in Oklahoma, which I want to say was 2012 or 2014. I can't remember which year, but it's like the only playoff game they won for a really long time. And Dirk's just a key part of it. And he's mixed up with so much of my basketball and kind of like my life memory at points where, now that I've had some time away from not being able to watch Dirk, which has been a little sad. It's really just remarkable how much of an impact he had on how I think about basketball.
Totally. And I think that signposting your life through sports is such an interesting thing, right? Like, I was just watching the Harry Potter reunion special on HBO, and those actors were talking about like, oh, I remember when I got my driver's license because it was during Goblet of Fire or whatever. Mm-hmm. My life very much aligns in that way with growing up in Dallas as someone who lived and died at that point in time in my life with the Mavericks. I graduated high school in 2007. I graduated college when I was covering the team in 2011. So it's like there's these kind of clear markers in terms of where I am relative to where the Mavericks were at that time. That makes it hard, as you're saying, to separate like what your own experiences are from where the team was, whether you're a fan, whether you're a media member, whatever. Like, I think it's very natural to kind of anchor it in that way. And the fact that there was one player, and in the Mavs case, often a lot of players who were hanging around for 5-8 years at a time. It was just such a different era in terms of player turnover. But even now, like, there's a reason why guys like Steph are so singular, why guys like Kobe Bryant with the Lakers were so singular. Like, there's just a different kind of relationship you can develop by being in one place for such a long time. And I don't mean to over glamorize it. Like, that comes with its own issues and its own complications. And
Sure.
I think going a different route can be just as viable depending on what you want. But it's not an accident that pretty much as soon as Dirk retired, a lot of things around the Mavs, even with Luka there, started to kind of spin in a different direction. Like, Rick Carlisle is a very challenging guy to play for, as we've seen with the way he's interacted with the Mavericks players. And yet with Dirk, it seemed pretty easy. His relationship to Jason Kidd was whatever it was, Carlisle's, but Dirk, like that, as far as superstars go, just as coachable as they come, as patient as they come. Mm-hmm. I think the Curry comparison you brought up is super apt, just in terms of as a culture setter and as a guy who can kind of grab the fabric of your organization and hold it together for a long time. I think those guys have a lot in common.
Yeah. It's really something, because I know I have a lot of, we're within the same age range, and I know a lot of friends that were huge basketball fans that simply have dropped off in the post-Dirk era, because you don't you're not going to have a relationship like that again. I know you had already transitioned to covering the, basketball professionally. So your relationship changes at that point anyways, just because you're so stuck in basketball. But I know our Andrew Tobolowsky once told me that he's just like, I'm never going to look at basketball the same way again. I can't do it. And that's just the sort of impact and relationship that something like 21 years in a uniform, while also being just so good, can do for a team and a franchise.
And you hope that today's fans get some version of that, right? Like, It's going to be a little different. It's going to be shaped and the texture of it, like it's all going to change. But, there's somebody growing up watching Giannis right now who's having an incredible formative basketball experience. And there've obviously been people watching Steph and having that experience. And there are people with their own version of that with LeBron or with KD. Mm-hmm. They just kind of transport with those players to different teams and they see different things. It's a totally different viewpoint, but you latch on to stars at a certain age in your fandom, and they're always going to change the way you look at what players should and shouldn't do and the way they should and shouldn't act. And if you were lucky enough to be in Dallas or following the Mavs and have that kind of relationship watching Dirk, I think you're in a great place for it. I think it's just an incredible example and testament to what people can do on an individual and talent level, but also the capacity for change and evolution and patience and loyalty. If you're into that sort of thing, like you can take this in a lot of different directions based on your value system. But just an unimpeachable player, just an unimpeachable winner when given shitty hands, when given great hands. I mean, we're just talking about one of the most revolutionary and productive and clutch players to ever play the game. Like, you can't ask for more than that as a basketball fan.
And I can't ask for more of your time. Rob, thank you so much for taking time out of your Tuesday afternoon to talk a little Dirk with me.
Hey, anytime, Kirk.
You guys can find Rob's work at The Ringer. Rob, will talk with you soon. Up next, we have here Bobby Karalla. Y'all should know Bobby for his work with Mavs.com, but Bobby has been a Mavs aficionado for as long as he has been alive. I believe his mom worked for the team, or maybe still works for the team. He covered the Mavericks with me at, it was either the two-man game or Mavs Outsider. I can't even remember at this point. So I wanted to have Bobby on because Bobby has covered the Mavs both outside and within. And Bobby, how are you today?
I'm good, Kirk. How are you? And it was the Mavs Outsider Report days. I missed the two-man game, sadly. It was just right before my time.
Well, all this stuff starts to blend together. And, you have a truly unique perspective compared to everyone else I've had on, because you've gotten to see Dirk up close in moments that the rest of us haven't, because you've been with the team. And I was wondering if you might be willing to share, what are some of your favorite Dirk memories that might not be, the championship and the MVP and yada, yada, yada.
I mean, I think like the prevailing Dirk memory for me, not so much a story. I mean, I do have some stories, but kind of the general Dirk sort of whole vibe is that he was extremely competitive on the floor, but he was such a good guy off of it, right? And usually that manifested itself in the form of like, compassion or like, generous charitable donations or whatever, but also like he was just a hilarious guy. And there was one example that really stands out to me. It was the first season that I was working for the team full time. So this is 2015-16. And it was right at the end of the year. It might have even been the last road game of the season. It was like right at the very end of the 2015-16 year. And we were on the bus on the way to a game in Utah, road game. And I sit down on the bus, and I'm always on the bus before the players are. And, usually players will sit a few rows behind me, but for whatever reason, all the rows were taken up. So I was toward the back of the bus. Players were sitting right behind me. And so in comes Chandler Parsons, sits down in the row right behind me. In comes Dirk, sits in the row right next to Parsons. So they're both, within 5 feet of me. And midway through the bus ride, Parsons just pokes me on the shoulder. And basically for the rest of the 10 or 15 minutes on the bus, him and Dirk are just taking turns, taking shots at my appearance, making fun of my hair, making fun of my polo, making fun of my pants, making fun of my glasses, my beard, literally everything. Just taking turns, one by one. It was a dunk contest to see who could get me the most or the worst. And I was like, you motherfucking, shouldn't you be paying attention to the game? But sure enough, they go into Utah that night, and Dirk has a great game. They win, and they clinch a playoff spot. I mean, that's what he did. He would go into the gym, do his business. They would usually win, more often than they lose. And then he'd come on the bus and, make fun of some crazy fan or make fun of some crazy play that happened. Or at the hotel, he'd be like, after the game, we go into the ballroom and there's always a meal. And it's always chicken, mashed potatoes, and broccoli. I mean, that just is what it is. Dirk would walk into the room and he'd always look to the employees and say, let me guess, chicken, potatoes, broccoli, and a roll. And he'd, flip open the things, be like, oh, I'm right again. Just always just making fun of everybody and everything. But in such like a trivial way. I mean, you could never get upset about it because, you're too busy laughing right along with him.
Seem like a proponent of dad jokes, Dirk Nowitzki.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He's definitely the kind of guy that'll be like, see you next year on December 31st.
I may have done something just like that recently. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, now that we've had some time in hindsight, I wanted to know what your favorite part was of the Dirk of the Mavs' really amazing Dirk retirement ceremony, because I've been watching videos, our site's been putting together, certain things. And like, I came across the Uncle Dirk video narrated by Brad Townsend, and it was just such a moving evening. And I wanted to know which part was your favorite?
Man, okay. So there were two. First off, just having Detlef in the building, Detlef in particular, as kind really of cool. The German predecessor. Yeah, that was really special. And, like you were saying, my mom used to work for the Mavs, and she was with the team way back in the early 80s when there was like 10 employees. And so, she and my dad actually got to know Detlef very well. So it's really cool to see there be kind of such a strong connection between Det and Dirk and kind of Germany just in general. But having Bird there and Pippen and Barkley and Sean Kemp, that was freaking awesome. And there was very, very low number of people that knew that was going to happen. It was a surprise to almost everybody. And so whenever I was lucky enough to find out about that, I had to basically sign a blood oath not to divulge that information. So that was a lot of fun to kind of be a part of. But the number one thing was the Uncle Dirk video. I watched it that morning in the office. I got to the office really early that day and flipped it on my desk. I was just running through everything that we were going to show. And I just started sobbing at my desk at like 8 in the morning. I'm just crying like a baby. And we get to the arena that night and it plays at the arena. And of course, 20,000 people are sobbing like children. And then, Dirk emerges from the huddle and even he's crying. And that was really, that was a very moving thing to see him brought to tears. All the other stuff that we were showing that night that was super emotional and really cool, but like that was the one thing that really broke him. That was a very powerful moment and just shows like how much he really does care about helping people and how seriously he takes his role as like a leader off the floor and kind of as a role model and hero to people. But also it just drove home the fact like so many people feel like they can identify with Dirk because he is such a normal dude, there's nothing that seems super special about him athletically, but also, more importantly, personality wise. And so, whenever you are watching this video of him, playing with sick and ill and, children that are experiencing things that none of us have ever had to go through before. And then you look down at the court and he's got 30 points, but like, he's too busy crying to think about how good of a game he's having. Like it just, we feel like we can connect with him in a way that we just simply have never been able to with any other superstar caliber player, certainly in Dallas, but arguably around the rest of the league too. It's just such a special connection that we feel to Dirk and that Dirk feels to us, but also we see so much of ourselves in him. And this goes back to, his story kind of being one of failure, right? Like his whole career was climbing this mountain and never getting any closer. In fact, many times getting further from the peak as his career went on, and then he was finally able to get there. And like so many of us feel like things that we've had to overcome in our life are carry themselves out in that same way. So I don't know. That was a very long-winded way of saying the Uncle Dirk video was awesome.
No, it's absolutely outstanding. It's why I wanted to bring you on. The servant leadership that Dirk basically lived by for his entire career is something that really stands out to me. And the other thing that I think is really sort of underrated, and as I move further into covering basketball as less a fan and more of a, it's kind of a job now, I guess it matters.
Well, you're a check mark now, Kirk.
That happened kind of without my deal, but
you're one of us, man. Get over it.
I earned that, didn't I? I think it's really cool how much Dirk has absolutely adopted Dallas and North Texas. And it's just so uncommon with the way teams and players move around. They have the ability to, they have the freedom. And, he came here and he talked about it today in his press conference. I've only heard a little bit of it, but he talked about how it was just such a new experience. And the way he's made this place his home as I get older, and particularly now that I'm back in the area for the first time in 20 years, it feels so special that he's done that. And it's something that I really love about him.
Well, and for him, I mean, he's such a simple guy, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, he'll tell you, like, the reason that he loved the playoffs so much was because it was warm outside, and he liked Dallas because he could go out to eat and, like, not be bothered all that much. He was just such a simple, easygoing, kind of to himself, really introverted by nature kind of guy, even though he was a big jokester that, despite all of the posh and newness of Dallas, and now it's kind of a big club city more than what it really ever has been. There's a whole lot going on at night nowadays, but it is it's a city that is a very big city, but you can feel kind of like it's a small town, and I think that fits with his personality in ways that were he to have gone to like the Knicks or the Lakers or the Heat or something, like in a more kind of hustling and bustling town, I don't know if it would have blended as well. And I think Jokic is kind of that same way, and Denver fits that perfectly too. And we saw him talk about
that was
Dirk
cool
last night after the game. Yeah, that was great. So I think, like, I don't know, in a way, we're obviously very lucky to have gotten to watch Dirk, but I think Dirk was kind of lucky that he ended up here and not, even in a place like Boston where everyone is just crammed together so much more. There's not as much privacy, not as much sort of peace and quiet. And I think that those are things that Dirk really values a lot.
Well, Bobby, this has been exactly what I had hoped for. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Tuesday afternoon.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. One of the things I love about Indeed is it makes hiring all in one place so easy and streamlined so I can spend more time on the rest of my business. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Now we're joined by Jonathan Tjarks of The Ringer. Jonathan, how are you today?
I'm good. My son's actually playing on me here, and he's giggling going on. That's what's happening.
Hey, you know what? That's okay, because what I wanted to talk with you about is something that really I wanted to talk to you about Dirk today. And Dirk, he's been a part of our lives as long as any family member in some circumstances. So what I wanted to ask you just in a few minutes is to if you could kind of walk me through, what you think about when you think about Dirk Nowitzki.
Oh my gosh, it's hard to even know where to start. Watched him play for 20 years. Trying to think the best way to. I would say ultimately, I think with Dirk, what I always go back to is this is a guy who saw the game in a different way than anybody else saw it. I guess Dirk and Holger to an extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was right, and literally everyone else was wrong. And you got to respect that, right? Like, I think as a big man, I should play this way. And everyone thought he was insane. And no one thought he could do it. He was doubted the whole time. Kind of like Steph in a way, I guess. He's like, no, actually, I'm right, and the whole world is wrong. And let's be honest, most times in life, when somebody has an attitude, they're a complete crazy person and you shouldn't listen to them at all. But every once in a while, they're actually right and everyone else is wrong. And that was Dirk.
So you've been covering basketball for a pretty long time. Do any Dirk games in particular stand out for you that you actually got to cover in person?
Well, I really got into journalism after college, which was like 2010, 11. I mean, the Dirk game for me will always be the San Antonio Game 7.
Oh, 2006.
That's the one. That's the OG Dirk game. That's the game, for me at least as a fan, where I said, okay, I'm riding with Dirk from now on. Because, before that, can he win? Is he tough enough? Blah, blah, blah. Is he clutch? Blah, 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 blah. That was the game, Game 7, on the road, overtime, defending champions, San Antonio Spurs, down 3, 10 seconds left. I mean, it's just unbelievable. That was truly the and one on Ginobili. It's just, that's what sports is all about, man. That was just truly incredible stuff.
Well, and that basketball series is kind of widely regarded for particularly people kind of within all our age range. That series was one of the best playoff series in 20 years.
I mean, I think, wasn't that the one where every game was at the buzzer, the ball was in the air?
I think so.
And it was 6 or 7 games. They were
7 games. Yeah, 7 games on the road. What else did I want to ask you? Because I was just really excited that you were actually able to join me on such short notice. Was there anything about Dirk's game that you particularly latched on to? Because he was kind of a malleable player. It's interesting you talked about how, Holger had him playing outside, but then, Avery eventually got his butt, post adjacent. And it's really interesting, where you could really map out Dirk's career into 3 distinct phases.
Yeah. In terms of the way he played, I could never really shoot. So it never really worked for me in terms of as a player. So I was well, this is the whole thing. I don't have this kind of game. I don't know. It's a tough question. What exactly are you asking?
I guess I'm asking, which part of Dirk's game was the most entertaining to you? Because he did a lot of things. He shot some threes. The fadeaway is kind of an iconic thing. I think Dirk's the thing that I kind of point to when I talk to younger people about Dirk, on the Mavs Moneyball staff, is that he was actually shockingly athletic in a way that gets forgotten.
Yes. I mean, I feel like basketball to me ultimately is game of athleticism. I love the early Dirk, run and gun. Remember that series against KG where he dropped 40 on him and they blew? I think that was their first series they won, and they were so fast and Dirk was just running around the court full speed. That was awesome. That was definitely not the best version of Dirk, but it might have been the most fun version of Dirk.
Because he really, it's every time Dirk dunked in the later years, it was almost kind of a joke. But early Dirk would dunk on dudes with authority. He was not afraid of contact. He was not afraid of getting bumped. And it's the sort of thing that gets lost because he's such a prolific mid-range shooter. But once he really settled down and he realized he probably shouldn't be taking that kind of physical contact, it's that part of the, probably I want to call it 2000 to maybe 2004 Dirk was just so frighteningly athletic.
Yeah, it's funny because every jump shooting big man always gets tagged as soft. And, sometimes it's true. And it's hard to know sometimes. Sometimes for me, I get caught in the trap the other way because I remember how often Dirk was called soft. And I'm I don't know about this. But sometimes jump shooting big men are soft. Yeah. Sometimes European players are soft. But he was not one of them. Remember all his teeth got knocked out all those times?
Yeah.
He'd always go to the cup hard.
He eventually wore the mouthpiece. See, now my dog is barking at me. This is just great audio content for the people out there. It's going to be the nature of things. But yeah, well, I love talking about Dirk, and this jersey retirement ceremony has sort of snuck up on me because I was getting into I was just mainly focused on making it to Christmas, and then all of a sudden it's New Year's, and now he gets to play. They're going to do the jersey retirement after the Warriors game, and I think there's a little bit of, you mentioned Steph earlier. That's somebody I've talked about with a couple of people today. I really actually think it's neat that they're doing the ceremony with the Warriors, or playing the Warriors, because Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, to a slightly lesser extent, are such interesting game-breaking shooters that, you know, and there was, I think it was the 2014 All-Star game where Dirk got an alley-oop from them for a dunk, and there's this crazy photo of all three of them standing together with Dirk pointing to the sky. And I don't know,
I remember this. Yes, I remember that. I know what you're talking about.
Someone, and I don't remember who, but made a meme that said Splash Father with Splash Brothers, and it's just I really love it. So I'm kind of excited to see them, because like Curry, it seems to, and Draymond Green too, like that team is filled with guys, and Steve Kerr, that have like a real appreciation for basketball history. And so it's kind of neat that they're doing it with some additional luminaries in the building. Are you going to be able to make it to that game?
Yeah, I'll be at that one. I mean, you know, they're milking the Dirk thing as long. Then they have a day where they gave him they'll have a day where they gave him the street.
Yeah.
They'll have a day where they give him the statue. And they'll have a day where they give try the jersey. But I love it. Milk it all you want. Some things deserve to be milked, you know.
Couldn't agree more, man. All right, I will let you get back to your Tuesday evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And yeah, Dirk forever, man. It's good stuff.
Hello, everybody. This time I'm joined by Dalton Trigg, newly installed editor-in-chief of DallasBasketball.com. How you doing, Dalton?
Man, I'm doing pretty good. It's already been a very busy week, but you know, that was a really fun Mavs Nuggets game, and you know, the Mavs have won 3 straight games for the first time since, I believe, early November. You know, so things are good right now. I'm having a blast.
Well, I didn't even prime you for what I wanted to talk to you about. That's how good of a friend you are coming on the show this quickly. Yeah. So I've been talking to people all day long about Dirk, and you were an ideal person to talk to about Dirk. And my question for you, because I don't entirely think I've ever actually heard this story, is how the heck did you come to be a Mavs fan, and how did you come to be such a big Dirk fan?
Well, it's a couple things. So I have the family business. My dad, he was about 33 when he was in the cattle business with my grandparents, and you know, at a certain point, he just said, "I don't want to do this anymore. I want to, you know, go into, you know, selling trailers and stuff of that nature." So he started doing that. It started off small, but it started to pick up a little bit. And, you know, when I was growing up in, you know, elementary school, middle school, every other weekend we were, you know, I live in Mississippi, but we were driving out past the Dallas-Fort Worth area every other weekend. And, you know, I had watched the Mavs on TV, and, you know, I was familiar with the Dirk, Nash, Finley teams and everything, but, you know, I had never actually been to a game. And, you know, we went out that way so often that it was natural that I just attached myself to them. And, you know, as you know, the Cowboys as a byproduct of that, but mostly the Mavs, because I've always been a big basketball guy. So, long story short, we were coming back through Dallas one time, and we just happened to see a billboard, and it was like, Mavs are playing tonight, and it was against the Suns. And, you know, I had no idea it was game 5 of the Western Conference Finals at that point. You know, I didn't know that, you know, we were going to end up going through. And, you know, it was one of those things like, hey, let's go see if we can get some tickets off the street. And we found a scalper. We got some tickets. It was nosebleeds, but it was like right in the center, so it was still a great view. And it just so happened that Dirk dropped 50 on the Suns that night, and it was just an incredible experience. I think that was the moment where, you know, I went from, you know, casual fan to diehard.
How did I not know this? I talk to you every day for like 5 years. I have never heard this story.
Well, and funny enough, when I left Mavs Moneyball and started with Fish at DallasBasketball.com, it was when we were still with 24/7 Sports, And that was one of my first pieces. It's like how I got to this point. I'll have to go back and find it and share the link, but I did write about it.
Okay, I remember this now. I just guess we've never actually talked about it, which is kind of a different
Right.
deal.
Right. But that's kind of where it took the leap from from casual fan to die hard. And then I was watching when I graduated from Southern Miss in 2016. I had some extra time on my hands, after work and everything, and I was watching every Mavs game regardless. And
Right.
I was just like, you know what? I'm not the greatest writer, but I like to write and I like the Mavs. Let's put this together and see where it goes. And it's been a fun 5 to 6 years.
Well, okay, so if you were to, you're talking to a stranger, you're talking to somebody who you kind of know, your wife drags you to a dinner party, they find out you write about basketball, and they find out you're a big Mavs fan. What is your kind of go-to story or memory about Dirk Nowitzki that you most enjoy sharing with people?
Well, it depends on if it's on court or off court. But, obviously I love to go with the off-court story. I've shared it with you multiple times. We did a round table earlier today on the site, and, I put that as my favorite Dirk memory. But, given where I live, I'm an hour and a half from New Orleans. I go down there to every single Mavs Tales game. I've been doing that since about 2013 when I realized just how cheap tickets were down there. Well before the media stuff. And, when we went down there, we would sit pretty close behind the Mavs bench, and there were a handful of times where we got to meet Dirk, and he was super nice and real down to earth. All the Dirk stories you hear, everything's true. He lives up to all of that. He's so humble and so nice to everybody. He treats everybody like he's their best friend. So that was always nice. So when my wife and I were engaged, it was the day after Christmas in 2016. She was just like, let's give Dirk our wedding invitation. It's like, obviously we know he's not going to come, but because it's in the season and everything, but it's like, let's just give it to him. It'd be a nice gesture. So we gave him our wedding invitation, and he acted like he was happy to get it and everything. And then he went back into the locker room after warm-ups. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking like, he could just disregard this and like throw it in a trash can in the locker room, and we would never know. And everybody just go on with their lives. And then
right.
Two weeks later, we get the invitation back in the mail, and he signed it, and he wrote, "Congrats, all the best," and like that just floored me. Like,
that's really cool.
Like,
I think I've heard that too, but it's left my brain after so many years. That's great.
And honestly, didn't expect anything from it. We didn't ask him to sign it. We didn't ask him to go through whatever method he went through to get it mailed back to us. Nothing.
Right. It's just,
we just handed it to him. He went back in the locker room, and then 2 weeks later, it showed up in the mail. And we were just like, wow.
Love
so he didn't have to do that, and it was a simple gesture, but it was kind. And they say you never want to meet your heroes, but I disagree with that with Dirk Nowitzki. He is 100% who we think he is.
Love it, Dalton. This is why I wanted to have you on. Thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday and talking with me, man.
No problem, man. I hope the rest of this season, picks up and keeps going the way it has these last 3 games. It should be a fun one.
That's right. We'll talk soon. Have a good one. Now we're joined by the Athletics' Tim Cato. Tim, how are you today?
I am doing great, Kirk Henderson. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday to talk to me. I have to ask, so when did you first start covering games in person? I don't remember.
It was the 2012-13 season.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So that was kind of that was one of the more chaotic, this year probably rivals it, but that was one of the more chaotic years, because wasn't that the year where Eddie Curry started at center? I think it was.
It was, and I'll be honest, I was. It's probably fair to say I was a very stretch of the definition of the term reporter or journalist at that point.
Sure.
I probably went to about 10 home games. Every home game I went to felt like I was entering a new universe. I had not learned the rules or the environment. I was literally learning journalism at my student newspaper as I was driving to games every so often. I went to some more games the 13-14 season. And by the 14-15 season, I would say I was actually in the locker room asking questions, being present. Dirk knew my face, since I know we're really focusing on him.
Yes.
But yeah, I was in the locker room a couple seasons before that. But in terms of being someone that could build and relationships and hold rapport with players, that didn't come for a few seasons later, as I quite frankly grew as a person.
Yeah, no, that's when you're grinding for a while. So with that in mind, what's sort of the first like professional Dirk related memory that you have? And thinking about it in the vein of covering games and actually getting to ask him stuff.
Okay, I have two. The first one is so this would have been 2014. It would have been the 2014 series against the Spurs that went to a Game 7. This wasn't one where I asked him a question and got some reply back, and it just stuck with me forever. But I was in the locker room for Game 7. I drove down to San Antonio. I had actually just broken up with my college girlfriend, my first college girlfriend, the day before. I do remember that for some fun color to add to this. And I'm in the locker room, and we all remember that series. And Vince had hit the shot earlier, and the Mavericks maybe had a chance if DeJuan Blair hadn't been suspended. And by the end of it, it's really clear. The feeling around the Mavericks is really clear that even going into that series, okay, yeah, everybody knew that Dirk was running out of chances. But once the Mavericks went up 2-1 in that series, and I think then came back to 3-3, there was kind of a what if, like, oh, maybe he's going to get at least one more run. And when he lost that Game 7, we all knew what was going to happen.
Right.
They lost a couple more first-round series, and then they spiraled into a toilet. And we all have discussed at length everything that happened. But even then, in 2014, we kind of knew. And I think Dirk knew. Functionally, he knew in that game, in that locker room. He was the only person who went to the press conference room to talk after that Game 7. And it was a blowout. It was a defeat. It was obvious by like halfway through the third quarter, the Mavericks were losing and their season was ending. And so Dirk and his teammates had a solid 45 minutes to just dwell on that fact, which is wild, to be that competitive and just sitting there knowing your season's going to end, but just sitting there and sitting there and sitting there. And Dirk, he gets called up to the press conference room, and he's about to step out. He had just got dressed. He's the only one going there. And right as he walks out the door, he's at AT&T Center, the Spurs locker room. Right as he's about to walk out of the locker room, he turns around and he looks at one of the attendants, one of the AT&T Center attendants, one of the local attendants. Someone the Spurs hired, just a kid, and he like calls him out by name, and he's like, "Hey, like, good luck in school." And then he does that to another guy who was in the locker room. So clearly, over the course of the series, they played 4 games there. Clearly, Dirk at some point had been like, "Hey, what's your name? What's up? What are you studying? What grade are you in?" And remembered that well enough that when everything is just heaping down on him, some part of him clicked in and was like, "Hey, let me. I'm not going to see these guys again. Who knows if they're going to be here next season. Let me be sure to say bye to him." So that's the story I always tell about him. That's the one that really stood out to me. I think
it's a great story. I've never heard that from you.
Well, it's in my book, so
I need to read your book. Is what I'm hearing.
Oh, wow! You've only had what, 5 years?
I have your book. It's on my bookshelf. Man, I've read this. My brain is just filled with
I'm sure you
stuff.
have. It's honestly, Kirk, like, I think you have read it because it's the first chapter, and even I believe that you probably got it through a few chapters. And I'm going to tell anyone that has the book, read the whole thing. really the first chapter and the last chapter are the two I'm proud of. If you have that book and you've never dove into it, just read the first and last one. They're pretty good, and I think they hold up. Anyway, the story that sticks out to me personally is I got to sit down with him. It was in Atlanta. It was my first season with the Athletic, first season traveling, his last season. And it's really the only time I'd ever had a one-on-one, like a truly one-on-one, extended one-on-one, not just me walking with him en route to the bus, but he hadn't debuted yet. He was injured to start that year. He missed the first couple weeks of the season. I think Maxi Clable was also out. There's somebody else who was also out. And so after a shoot around, him and that other player, it might have been Dwight Powell, him and that other player stuck around to work out. And Dirk's workout ended sooner. And so all of the Mavericks had left, but, there was like 3 coaches and 2 security guys left over. And then these 2 players. And Dirk's just sitting there on a sideline. And so I walk over to him, and I have, probably to this day, my only extended one-on-one chat. I was not in the inner circle. I was not there in 1998 when Dirk debuted. There was no reason for Dirk to let me in, and I don't begrudge that whatsoever. I was not, he had friends and people and people he trusted. And I had, I was even that season, that was my first year traveling on a beat. But that was my moment. I got a good 25 minutes with him. I talked to him a lot about his injury, and I ended up writing a story about that. Then I had some other stories I had ended up asking him about. And then I just remember that, at least for a few minutes at the end, I don't remember if my recorder was rolling or not, but I just kind of got to chat with him a little bit, because he's not doing anything. He's just sitting there. He's waiting for whatever teammate it was to finish his own workout, and they're all going to take a bus back together. I think they're going to call an Uber, which I still don't know how NBA players I think Uber XL was designed for them. But they're all, he's just waiting, and he's got time, and he's just chilling, and just the nicest dude. And, I think I want to say he even asked, so you're with the Athletic now? And, he had some awareness that I was, he knew I'd been a guy around for a while. I don't think that he, to this day, understands what Mavs Moneyball is and what relation it has to SB Nation.
Neither do
honestly,
we.
Yeah,
Neither do we.
God help that man, because he shouldn't need to know that. I pray to him. I pray to him that he has never heard the term Vox Media in his entire life. But he had some awareness that I was somewhere around, and that I was oh, you're actually on the road traveling with the team. That's a new thing. So he asked me, not warm and fuzzy, you're my best friend, and he shouldn't have been. It should not have been.
He treated
that.
you like a person.
But
exactly these things.
Exactly.
Sorry, my dog is very excited that we're talking about Dirk. You hear so many kind of unfortunate stories, and I think more and more athletes are better about this. But he's in his 21st year, and he's talking to you just like you're a human being, and he doesn't, he didn't have to do that, but time and again, from what I'm hearing from people all day long, is just this is the sort of stuff that made Dirk different.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's spot on. Is that, and sometimes it's not even in a negative way when I say that some athletes just don't really view us on equal standings, don't view us as peers, because in some ways we're not. But it's I guess the difference is that when athletes view themselves as NBA superstar athletes, we are not their peers. And when they view themselves as just people whose job is NBA superstar athlete, but deep down their identity is I'm just a dude, of course they're going to look at other people and be like, okay, that's also just a dude, just like me. And I think it's very easy for NBA athletes to get into that mindset of I am a superstar. I am, I send one tweet and 1,000 people reply to me within 10 minutes. And of course it's easy to fall in that mindset. And Dirk never did. He never wanted to. And he certainly never did. And I think that's, not unique to him, but it is who he is. And it is very much him. And it deserves to be acknowledged as many times over, because once you got to that pedigree and that level, it did, I think, to some degree, become increasingly rare for humans to operate as humans on that level.
Yeah, and this is why we tell stories. This is why, you're to a degree, I'm sure, why you're in media, because you want to share things about the athletes that you cover. And, Dirk was around for such a long time. And, I kind of like talking about Dirk in almost any opportunity because he, as we get further and further away from it, his career lasted such a long time. I think that a specific segment of the population really only remembers like the end. And, you want to talk about these things that last such a long time because he was a great dude the whole time. Never embarrassed the Mavs fans. He was just and I really like talking about it. I'm really looking forward to the game tomorrow night. Are you going to be there?
I'm going to be there. I also have a big piece of Dirk stories, Dirk anecdotes, Dirk memories. That's publishing Wednesday morning.
Outstanding,
dude. It's great. I've just been going through final edits. I've been known to promise stories that do not publish when I promise them to publish. This is publishing Wednesday morning. It's basically scheduled, and it's really good. And I think that it's funny that you talk about like storytelling and a lot of what I think I'm best at this job is storytelling. And sometimes you almost feel like a historian where you go to one person. It's almost like a reverse game of telephone, where instead of the object or the subject becoming more and more distorted, as you talk to more and more people, you spark their memory, and then you can take, okay, so one person tells me this story, I bring it to another person in question, they give me a few more details, I bring those details back to the first person, and they're like, oh, right, that did happen like this, and I remember this other aspect of it. And it builds and it builds, and over time you actually have a more complete version of events, and you have more people telling it to you. And that's one of my favorite things about this job. I've really enjoyed those kind of historical or the stories that almost really do make me feel like a historian, like I'm, recording history, like I'm setting a record of what happened in the past and setting a correct record about these people's lives. And, sometimes it's Dennis Rodman, but sometimes it's Dirk Nowitzki, who is fully, the Rodman thing. Yeah, that was interesting to go back. But the Nowitzki thing, that is like, I genuinely like, in this person meant something to me. And so there is something a little extra special about being able to do that and going through the process of reporting out this story.
Well, Tim, we'll be looking forward to that tomorrow. And really thank you for taking time out of your day, your busy day, to talk to me about Dirk stuff. You know what? He's going in the Hall of Fame soon, and I'm sure we're going to rehash some of the same stuff. I don't care. I like talking about it every single time. Because I hear something new every single time. I mean, I just had Dalton Trigg on a little while ago, and he told me a story, but before he was a reporter, he gave Dirk his wedding invitation. Just kind of, he and his wife just decided to do it. And then 2 weeks later, he got the wedding invitation signed and sent back. Like, no reason for Dirk to do that. And I've just heard stories all day long of like Dirk just being a cool human. And like, it's really rewarding to hear that stuff. I'll listen to that sort of stuff all day.
I remember somebody telling me once what it's like to go to his mailbox, which, if mail is addressed to Dirk Nowitzki, sent to the Mavs offices, they've just got a place they collect it. And obviously Dirk gets, 100 times what any other person in the, I don't know who would be mailing, I don't know, Dwight Howell or Moses Brown stuff. But people absolutely mail stuff to Dirk. I had a guy reach out to me, and I think he finally did this, but he wanted to share a U.S. Army or some
his
U.S.
Air
military
Force
award.
That
he got it.
He did it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's on Twitter. like I'm blanking on his name, but you know who he is. I know who he is. He's a good dude. We talk on Twitter from time to time. That was a super cool thing. And like he reached out to me about asking about how to go about this. But I just remember like one time somebody was telling some story about Dirk. He was like, yeah, he was in the office to sign all his mail and respond to all his mail. And it was just a throwaway because it was just so assumed that, yeah, Dirk's going to show up and take all this effing mail that he gets, like hundreds and hundreds of letters. And yeah, he's going to go through it and like, sign something. And I'm sure he's got like 5 assistants, like helping, make that efficient as possible. He's still showing up to do it. And that's a cool thing. And that really is who he is.
Well, Tim, thanks again. I appreciate you taking the time, and we'll talk soon. This has been Kirk and Tim on Mavs Moneyball.
Yes, sir. Read that story tomorrow. It will be up, and I'm excited.
All right, man. Have a good day. To finish off this podcast, I'm joined by Ben Collins of NBC News, who is taking a break from covering the crazy world to talk about something much more pure in Dirk Nowitzki. How are you tonight, buddy?
I'm good, man. And you know what? That's what the word is. Like, Dirk is the most pure, decent man I think that we had the ability to watch over the last 20, 30 years. We've just been very lucky people. So I'm very happy to talk about Dirk.
A lot of times, we're talking about the state of the Mavs, and you and I have been kind of circling one another, trying to find time to talk about that, but we'll do that another day.
Yeah.
What I want to know from you is, what was your first interaction with Dirk? Because for those who don't know, Ben has been a reporter for a very long time in one way, shape, or form or another, and he got to do some, what do we classify it as, Ben?
Child labor.
Okay, so tell us what you did, and then tell us about your first interaction with Dirk.
Yeah, I'm joking around. So, like, when I was a kid, I wrote a blog. When the internet was like 2 or 3 pages deep, about Mark Cuban, and it was like this very congratulatory blog. I was like, Mark, you're the greatest, and you're so handsome, and it's wonderful. And he invited me to write for the Mavericks website when he read this blog. So I did that for years. I did it when I was a child. I think I started when I was 12 or 13.
That's amazing.
It was really
What year was this?
This was in 2003, I think, was the start of it. So
okay, so we're talking like right as Dirk is just getting going.
Yes, like I would say right when he's entering his dominance phase, right? When he turns from like a lanky 3-point shooter exclusively into a multifaceted, really interesting player, like a legendary player, right? That's the year where we had Nick Van Exel and Rafe LaFrance, obviously Steve Nash, and Finley, one of the most fun teams of all time. I just loved that team so much.
Me too.
And that's part of what that was about, was how much I loved that team. So when the Mavericks would come to Boston, they would give me press passes. And I was 13 years old and just horrified. And they would send me into the locker room to talk to the players. And I, without pretty much any exception, all of these guys were extremely nice, really cordial, and really open to talking. But Dirk was just another level. You know, he was just a really lovely guy. I remember, like, the 3 guys in my head there I remember being particularly just wonderful were Dirk, Steve Nash, and Raja Bell, of all people. But Dirk was on another level. And the first time I met him, there was a picture of me that I think was taken, weirdly enough, by Al Whitley, the current GM of the Legends, who was then an equipment manager for the Mavericks. Not a joke. And Dirk's feet are in this giant mop bucket, like a mop bucket, but they barely fit in this mop bucket, and the mop bucket is filled to the brim with ice because his ankles are his ankles.
Sure.
Besides progress. And I am wearing, I think, like the baggiest khaki pants of all time. They're like Jinko sized khaki pants, and Allen Iverson answer ones. I'm diligently taking notes of probably the dumbest question ever asked to a person, but he was incredibly patient. And just like I said, like just a lovely human being. And then to get to watch him, that's like the blessing that we had as Mavericks fans. You know, he was growing up 10 years ahead of me, or whatever that was, 12 years ahead of me. And to get to watch him turn into literally a legend, like a true GOAT, while I was just like graduating from high school and college, was just a really formative thing in my life. He gave me so much motivation to just, to try to be great at stuff. I gotta say, watching him progress from guy who was constantly written off and derided, and labeled as a stiff or a soft or something, and overcoming that by himself and winning a championship, it really is one of the best things I've ever experienced as a fan of any sport or of anything at all. And I hope that you have the same experiences. And I know, Kirk, you just sent me probably a archive of
No, it's somebody taking one of your posts and posting it on the Dallas-Mavs.com forum and calling you a stupid kid. So
Yeah, it was.
the internet has been calling you names for
Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah, I have the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours in being called a stupid child.
Oh God,
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
You're
And
right,
by the way,
though.
I am an idiot. I am talking about how Keon Clark is better than Yao Ming in this, so I think it's probably is reading through this. No, it's it was Pravda style propaganda pushed by a child. Yep.
Well, and the Mavericks, for everybody that I have had on today, has kind of came into basketball during the early, really the early 2000s. If you're a Mavs fan, like Doyle Rader has been a Mavs fan his entire life. He suffered through the 90s. I can't claim that. I moved to Dallas and I really started to love the Mavericks when Dirk came on board. And it's been really wonderful hearing that he is as good, if not better, a dude than he is a basketball player. And that's something that I wasn't really prepared for when I kind of started this today. Like we've read everything, we've seen the videos. It's like, it, but in your head, you just associate Dirk basketball first. That should be that, and I'm sure he'd be okay with that. But just understanding that he was also like just a really like kind person while being wildly competitive. There's just like something. There's something really comforting about that, because it's some of these guys in the world. A lot of people just turn out not to be exactly who you think they are, and it's nice to hear that. So that's the first time. So if you were to say, past that first time, what like lasting Dirk memory do you have that is your favorite? Whether it be something like the championship or something like really specific that happened over the 21 years we got to watch him.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is Game 2 of the 2011 NBA Finals, right?
Game 2, okay, this.
I will watch this on YouTube constantly. It's the 15-point comeback, and somebody has clipped it up, so it's the last like 5.5 minutes. So they're down by 15, and you can see he's already probably a little bit sick, because he just doesn't look right. He's like a little. Mm-hmm. He famously had the flu later on in the series, but he just still doesn't completely look okay. And you watch them start to figure out that they can win the game over these like 4 or 5 minutes when the arena is over it. They're like, they don't think that this is a winnable game. And it's a remarkable video. And then there, in my mind, indelibly, I'm sure everyone thinks of the step back, right? When you think of Dirk, but I think of that, spin move layup that he has on Chris Bosh at the end of that game with his left hand, because that was the progression this guy took, right? This was a guy who came into the league, shot threes. Everyone was insistent that he play the small forward because he couldn't put weight on and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. This was a guy getting by a borderline Hall of Fame defensive five in Chris Bosh. In the hardest possible moment to do that, it is one of the, frankly, it is that whole series to me is the most impressive individual performance I've seen other than Michael Jordan in basketball. Just is, I will go to my grave thinking that, and I'm sure we'll see some others like that in the future. But
I don't know if we will. And here's why. It's so difficult nowadays Dirk was drafted in 98, and then he didn't play his first game till 99 because of the lockout. He had 12 full seasons with the Mavericks until he won the title, or it was 11, whatever. It was double-digit years with one team. To failing again, failing harder than before, and then almost fading into oblivion despite the fact that the Mavericks were a 50-win team. Guys just don't do that anymore. Nobody does. It's very, I don't know if we'll see that again in our lifetimes, like that sort of sports hero's journey. And it's something that I treasure the further we get away with it. And the only thing I'm really kind of disappointed about is that I was not really part of any Mavericks community whatsoever. Like, I lived in DC by myself and made my wife watch all the games. Like, nobody else I knew was a Mavs fan. So it's like, I didn't really get to experience that with anyone. But, as I've gotten older, there's just so many people out there who like, not, you don't want to say suffered as a Dirk fan, but it's like we're out there fighting our own windmills, and to watch that sort of moment happen and then it just sort of dominate the conversation for the rest of the time. Like, it's a little disappointing that the second half of Dirk's career wasn't quite as illustrious. We can talk about that another day, but it was very fun to get to root for him and like to see, all the stuff. I don't know if you've gotten a chance. I recommend digging into various people's coverage of the press conference today. Like, he's just so grateful and pleased to be a part of stuff still. And that's really neat to me.
Yeah. And I do think, Kirk, an important thing to bring up is how he was viewed before that championship, where he was for a long time viewed as a good but not great player, in the late 2000s, especially after that 2007 series and the 2006 series too, by the way. Like, they people believed that he didn't bring them across the finish line. There are a lot of reasons that season that series went that way, and the referees were a part of it, and that was a big part of it. And then next year he really lost. He lost it emotionally, and he went to like the Australian desert or something. Remember this whole thing?
Yes. Yeah, it's a walkabout. I posted it. If you go to Mavs Moneyball, we did a round table. It ended up being like 2,500 words of people sharing their favorite Dirk memories.
Yeah.
Our guy Matthew wrote about the time he was on Punk'd, which was hilarious. But then I talked like my favorite Dirk moment. I couldn't really think of a moment, but I remember that article, and it was in the Dallas Observer, I think. Like, you actually have to go on the Wayback Machine, like the you have whatever the web archive site is. It's not up anymore. And it's one of the more incredible pieces of sports writing I can really remember, because it doesn't have a lot of Dirk quotes. It's almost told like Call Me Ishmael type writing where and it's just, I mean, he was in pain and he couldn't. And what was so crazy is like, he had a lot coming still. Like 2007 was not the worst of it for him.
Nope.
I don't think by a long stretch. I mean, I think finding out that his girlfriend later at the time was a con artist, like he was just, I mean, it's as much as a pro athlete can suffer, Dirk suffered. I feel, and I'm really glad that he won the championship, because it validates, it shouldn't have to validate, but
it's pretty much the arc of Mad Men, his career. It's his life. Like, he completely loses his mind. He just he flees off to this other place. He's around all these like trickstery weirdos. And then it just comes to him when it shouldn't. And I think that's what's lost to people, is that, especially as I was a Mavs fan in 2011, people largely bet against them in round one against Portland. Mm-hmm. And they should have. That team was really good, and they kind of had our number, and they played a kind of basketball that was translating really well towards the end of the season. And like, our team was all right. If you look at it on paper, it's just like, it's kind of like, all right, well, we'll see what Jason Kidd can do here. And, nobody really thinks Jason Terry can be like, the second scorer on this team.
Right.
And I fervently did not believe that we could win until the middle of the Lakers series. And that's the thing with Dirk, is that his narrative is a movie, even more so than like Michael Jordan's. Michael Jordan's was a straight line. That guy's narrative was, that guy is a motherfucker and he is going to win this game. Mm-hmm. With Dirk, it was really bumpy, and people gave up on him. The Charles Barkley types, the punditry, they gave up on the guy, and then they were forced to concede. This guy.
That's really what's crazy. The concession, and then like Barkley, who had known about Dirk forever and was so, tried to get him to go to Auburn when he found but for Dirk, like, Barkley was horrible to Dirk, and on a professional level. But then he was at Dirk's retirement, and Dirk and it's like Dirk's kind of capacity for more is what I like. One of the things that separates him, because you talk shit about me the way Barkley did on national television, we're done.
Yeah, I feel like most NBA players are like that, right? Most NBA players they light a fuse.
Human beings, most human beings. It's like it's and he's special, and
to be able to channel that in that way was, the narrative about 2011 is that there was this evil super team against this one layman or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it was so much more than that. Dirk was everybody's failures combined, and he just overcame it all. And that's why, like, we were talking about how you were in DC at the time. I was in LA at the time, but I was at bars watching those games, and everyone in the bar was a Mavericks fan because people really didn't want the Heat to win. And people had seen this guy, Dirk, struggle for years in knowing he was good enough.
Sisyphus.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
getting shit on for no reason by all of these people. And he really did personally overcome it. And to have the illness at the end and overcome it, it was, to me, it was, like I was saying, it's just more of a movie than any athletic tale that I've seen in my lifetime. And to live through it for 20 years, we just owe a lot to the guy. I really, it's hard to explain this to the myriad of girlfriends that I've tried to explain it to over my lifetime, but it is remarkably motivational to see what this guy went through. And I love Luka to death. He is my beautiful son. But that guy was born with it in a way that Dirk wasn't.
Yep.
And Dirk absolutely fought for this. And it's just, I am very excited to see his number retire tomorrow.
Really looking forward to it too. Ben, I've taken more of your time than I said I would. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll have to have you back, I don't know, probably around All-Star break maybe, to see if we can figure out what the heck's going on with this team. But thank you very much. All right.
Yeah, maybe we'll have some idea by then, but currently I have no idea. So we'll see. I hope so.
All right. Guys, this has been Kirk Henderson and 8 other guests. MavsMoneyball.com. Please go and subscribe to the Mavs Moneyball podcast if you're just finding this. Rate and review as well. I'm very grateful for all the support, and I hope you guys enjoy this game. It's going to be something we should all remember.